Hello, this is Frida Liu, and you're watching The Shift, where we talk about sustainability. We all have to make that shift, whether it's seismic or whether it's small, we have to move. Now, even firms with long-standing track records of successfully integrating sustainability and ESG principles into their organizations are finding it more difficult than ever to stay ahead of dynamic and constantly evolving ESG expectations. So organizations that resisted establishing a formalized ESG policy and framework are now bowing to pressure from their investors, consumers, employees, boards and regulators, and now find themselves scrambling to catch up. So sustainability and ESG have gone from being a functional requirement to a commercial imperative. So Ahila Ganesan here with me, and she's from FutureLinQ. She's going to share how we can connect sustainability to strategy. Hello, Ahila.
Hi.
Thanks for coming all the way from Penang. So Ahila, I know you have a 4-step process helping companies on their sustainability journey. So let me start with your first part, which is to assess and identify what is important and how to begin the journey. Okay, so what do you mean by this? And let's take 2 examples, right? One being a manufacturing company, so they've got products, and another being a services company. Let's use an architectural firm because that's where you come from. So how would you begin to assess these companies?
Okay, so when it comes to sustainability in general, you need to know where you're at, right? So what you would do is a baseline. You need to understand where your company is. Now, the thing about manufacturing is that you have a completely different demographic that you're dealing with, right? You have a customer base. Their needs are very different from a clientele, right? So an architecture firm is a service provider, and for them, a clientele will require you to look at what the client needs, right? Whereas when it comes to a product, you have to look for the entire supply chain in terms of sustainability, as well as the needs of the customer, right? So it's not just about, it's actually quite a lot bigger.
Right.
And it's very different in the sense that one is about looking at the needs of a client, and then they have to make sure that they dovetail with their investors, right? Whereas when it comes to manufacturing, it is at looking at how you, as a provider of that product, going to make sure your investors are happy, your customers are happy, everybody is happy. Right? So you would start with a baseline. You would also start with investigating what you're already doing. So in an architecture firm, you could do your own things as well. You could do a paperless, you could do, making sure your electricity bills are lower, work from home a couple of times a week. There's many different ways to do it, right? To reduce the cost. And then you look at what the client needs. And the client will tell you what they need because they will look at their investors, right? And what the investors need. So that is quite simple.
It's quite simple, right?
In that way. Whereas when it comes to manufacturing, you've got a lot of other areas to look at, right? So baseline, look at what you're already doing, right? Before you go to the next step. Next step.
All right, so that's the first thing, find your baseline. Now, your second step is to strategize and to build that roadmap based on the company's priority and focus. So let's say for the manufacturing company, it's to attract new capital. And for the agri firm, the focus to employees. And maybe you covered that already, right? But how do you do this?
Okay, so you've got your baseline, right? Then you need to look at focus and priorities. How do you decide that? That will come from your own strategy, right? You look to your competitors. Who are your competitors? How are you going to navigate the space in order to have that value proposition that is going to set you apart from everybody else, right? And that's where you will then decide what is material to you as an organization and start going in that direction, right? So for instance, perhaps, because when you look at ESG, it's E, S, and G. And perhaps for this particular company, their issues are more in talent rather than anything else.
So the S bit.
The S bit. So perhaps the focus is going to be more material for them in the S bit. Right? It could be a company that is more concerned about supply chain and the E bit because they are investors. Perhaps it is an institutional investor and they're trying to go towards net zero. Right? The focus might be more in the E. So it really depends on what your needs are at that moment and how you look at the strategy of how you want to do your next 5 years.
Okay, so that's okay. That's the second part there. It sounds so simple, but I know when you're manufacturing and your product is a little bit more complicated in services. Now, your third step is to integrate the roadmap into the organization. How do you go about doing this again? And again, these kind of 2 scenarios, services and a manufacturing entity.
Okay, we'll take the manufacturing one first, right? So yeah, you've got a roadmap, you've got a strategy. You still need to have buy-in. You still need to have processes and policies in place, right? And that requires you to look at oversight at a higher level, your board level. Is your board ready for it? Is your senior management ready for it? Are there KPIs set to deliver that?
Okay.
Right? And is it then cascaded down to your next line and your next line?
Right.
Right? Your C-1, C-2. Is it cascaded down? Because you need to incentivize people in order to adopt.
Okay.
Buy-in as well as adoption. So it could be a combination of carrot and stick.
Okay.
Right? So some of it is you have to do this because this is where the company is heading. So that's the stick. And then some of it is incentivized, meaning that, look, people who achieve X amount of reduction in their department will, in emissions, will have extra benefits, entitlements, bonuses, so you incentivize. So that's the carrot.
Okay.
So it needs to be a combo, but you need to have every level of the organization buy in.
And so that's the challenging part, right?
Yes.
That's where they call you in.
Well, they call me in on all the parts as well, the strategy as well, right? To identify what's material for them. But yeah, but it's challenging, and that has to come from within the company. Okay. Because it's a daily conversation you need to have.
Right.
Right? And it's a daily push that you need to have.
Okay, so usually when you have these conversations, where is the most difficult in terms of buy-in? Is it the top?
I think it's at all levels because again, it depends on your KPI setting, right? Okay, so Alliance Bank did research recently, right? And in that research, they had, what are your top concerns? If you're an SME, what are your top concerns when it comes to adopting ESG? And they had 18 categories that were identified. And you had cash flow, you had profit, growth, and that was the top 2. Right. ESG out of the 18 was number 15.
Okay.
Right? Right. So again, it depends on how exactly are you structuring the company in terms of your immediate concerns and your future concerns, right? If it is going to be based on bottom line only, then you're going to find that they're still going to think about, hey, but my bonuses and increments are based on me delivering X amount of revenue.
Right.
Right? And that will be the same for your C-suites, right? That is, yes.
Okay, so that's why it's dependent on the KPIs. So the KPIs is not around that focus, I wouldn't be thinking about that at all.
Correct. And that's where there's the other hurdle that you face, because most of the time ESG is looked on as possibly an expensive endeavor. Right? It's more of a cost center than a profit center. And that's where the mindset needs to change. Because it is actually something in the long term will give you returns. Right? And that's where the mindset is not there yet.
So the mindset needs to change, but at the same time, my immediate concerns though is cash flow and profitability and growth, right? But
you can still have that.
Yeah, and you can still do it simultaneously, right? With the view that one day, this will be a profit center for us. Yeah. So still on step 3, what about in the case of an architect firm? Fairly straightforward?
It would really depend on the clientele you have, right? Okay. So for instance, if it's a clientele where you're doing a lot of, say, projects for government, yes, then you have to dovetail with the government's requirements, right? If they have set a net zero target by this, then your supply chain, when you are doing a particular project, needs to dovetail with that, right? And perhaps the building will be energy efficient and all of that. But if you're doing a project for a client who doesn't really care, then it really depends. Of course, you as an architect, you should endeavor to educate them on what is the right thing to do, but you might not always get the buy-in. Okay. So it is a constant struggle.
Okay. You can advise, you can recommend, and you can suggest, right? Yes. At the end of the day. But also I think, and that's where I guess where policies come into play and say, well, you have to, right? In a way, right? Yes. Okay. So, what is in your experience makes it most challenging to integrate?
Most challenging to integrate would go back to what I said earlier, what exactly your focus is, right? Because there's a certain amount of cost as well as effort that needs to go in when you want to pursue a journey, right? When it comes to ESG. So if you are all in, then that's good. But one way you could structure it, right? There is this cascading system, right? You've got the first step where it is just about complying. Right. right? So you're a minimalist. You comply. Whatever needs to be done, you comply to that. And then you go to the next level where you are pragmatist, right? So you're complying, but you're complying from the perspective of risk.
Okay.
I'm looking at my risk. What is the risk to me if I don't comply?
Okay.
Right? It could be you lose investors, it could be you lose customers, it could be you lose staff. Because your talent pipeline is also looking at, the younger generation is looking for people who are more responsible socially, right? So it could be that. And then you go to the next level, which is strategy, where you look at not just compliance and risk, but you look at opportunities.
Okay.
Right? So, I've got risk. Is there any way I can change it into an opportunity?
Right.
Right?
Okay.
And then finally, you've got the trailblazer. And a trailblazer is someone who is business as usual. This is the core of what I do. It is embedded. I don't think about it.
Right.
Because it is part and parcel of my daily day-to-day work.
So I'm just gauging from your experience and conversations. There are not many Malaysian companies which are trailblazers yet. We're still at that stage of.
I think there are a lot of them who are already on their way.
Okay.
Right? They are trying.
Yes.
They are trying. Again, carrot and stick.
Right.
You start off with compliance. So if you look at the bigger companies, they're going to have Bursa coming down on them.
Right.
If you're a listed company, Bursa coming down on them in terms of compliance and all that. So you have got the compliance, but they will move. Right. So it's a start. You need to start somewhere.
Right. Okay. And your final step is to communicate, right? In this case, do you mean formal or informal reporting? And how do you know your communication has been received and are effective?
Okay, that is something that needs to happen. That's a step that is embedded in every step, but it needs to come together as a finality as well, right? So that goes back to your narration. And when you say communicate, the communication needs to go down to the next level. Because at the end of the day, your employees are your best branding and advocates, right? So essentially, you need to get them to play ball with you. So communicate with them the good that you're doing, or engage with them to find out what their thoughts are. You can always have pulse checks, run a survey, find out whether they're happy. Employee engagement surveys are one option to see whether the employees are happy. Have surveys with your customers, with your investors, right? And say, hey, look, this is what I'm doing. What do you think? Do you have any feedback? So it needs to happen at different levels. That is the formal channels that you have within a company. And when you're dealing with your shareholders, your stakeholders, and your people. Informally, social media, talk about the things that you're doing well.
Right.
If you're doing something, talk about it. Make sure that, not just in social media, in your website, put it up. Be consistent about it. Be consistent about the messaging that you have, right? And that needs to come from your roadmap. You need to have a strategy on how you're going to roll out things as well when it comes to brands and communication.
In working with companies, how long can this 4-step process take? Right? What are dependencies? Is it size of company in terms of revenue? Is it the number of employees or other factors?
It's all of the above. It's all of the above. But the key thing is the nature of business. What type of business do you have? Right? A conglomerate is going to be very complex. It's going to take longer. Right? And then gathering information and data to see where your baseline is, where you at right now in terms of your emissions, where you at right now in terms of your talent pipeline, right? So all of that you need to do. And if you're the bigger the company, the more difficult it's going to be. Right? And the smaller you are, the faster it is. So going back to the examples, a manufacturing will take longer. And then your architect firm might be a bit shorter. Because if you're only for themselves, it's a bit shorter. Now, as to how long the duration will be, it really depends. What part of your journey are you on, right? Are you at the minimalist, pragmatist, strategist, or trailblazer? What part of it are you on? So you might find that perhaps in the beginning, you might have to take longer to kind of find your bearings. And then it gets easier over time. Right? Or it could be the reverse, meaning that you have started off with some basic foundation, and then as you build up, it takes more and more time because you're growing as well as you're taking, you're pushing your agenda for ESG. So there's no fixed time. I can't tell you, it's going to take 6 months. It will really depend on each company, what their needs are and what they want to prioritize.
And of course, this journey continues,
Yes.
Right? I mean, it changes, it never ends, right? And I guess like when you look at it, the usual roadblocks, is it, is it people? Is it the changing policies? What are the usual roadblocks to adoption?
It's all of that. It's the fact that it's a very dynamic landscape. ESG is so dynamic right now. It changes almost on a weekly basis in terms of reporting, in terms of which shareholder or stakeholder is looking at it and saying, I want to go towards net zero. So it changes so much. And then there's also the fact that in terms of the talent pipeline on who can help you on this journey, it's also lacking. Right. So that is a big challenge for a lot of companies. Now, the big companies perhaps can find talent and employ them. SMEs are going to struggle because they don't pay as much, perhaps, for talent. So how do you then fill those gaps that you need in order to be able to make sure that this journey is not, not having all these roadblocks along the way?
Okay.
Right?
In the case of an SME, which don't have the budget, right? And of course, do you get a task force where every department is represented, perhaps? Is that the way forward?
You have to. So perhaps you would have an ESG person, one person, right? Maybe that person is a manager, but the manager is not going to be able to understand what's happening in each department. Again, go back to manufacturing, right? So you're going to have the production people, the research people, it depends on what type of manufacturing you're doing. So every department will have its own emissions, its own data.
Right.
So the aggregator could be this one person, but all departments need to play ball. So it goes back to the buy-in. It goes back to the carrot and the stick that I was telling you. The tone at the top needs to be, we are doing this.
Right.
You need to follow through. You do it well, this is what you get.
Okay. And sometimes the carrot strategy works, sometimes the stick strategy works, right? So, and I'm assuming SMEs are watching this and would like to find out what are the costs involved in going on this journey as part of operational costs, and how much should they buffer should they get started on this,
Okay, so again, not a simple answer to give because it really depends on your nature of business, right? And how big you are. And I would say that you got to start off with the basic of having one person who's going to consolidate all of this information for you.
Right.
You can hire consultants outside. FutureLinQ provides that service. But at the end of the day, you understand your business. You still need someone to work with internally who's going to make sure that the information is collated. Right? And that needs to have someone internal. And then the individual departments working with you. As you grow, and you go from a minimalist to a trailblazer, you can add on to that team. But start somewhere. Start with the basic. It doesn't have to be some high flyer, chief sustainability officer if you can't afford it. It could be a manager. Right? And then you build up on it. You build up on your own internal talent pipeline. Right? Hire people, train them, get them the right training. It's not that you can't find training out there. You can. Get them the right training and build up from there. Okay, I want to end off with that report you talked about from Alliance Bank, where everybody's concern is about profit and growth and all that, and cost and then ESG is number 15. What is the worry? And I guess how do we get SMEs to understand this is going to be important? If I were to tell you this, right, you got to get started now. Why it's important? What would your message be? Look, you either get on the bandwagon or someone is going to use a stick on you. It's as simple as that, right? So SME provides services to a larger entity at some point. Right? And those larger entities are already having pressure from investors and regulators to start looking at this. So it will come to you. Right? It will. It's not a matter of will it. It's a matter of when. Right? So it's going to come. You either adopt now and start small, build a good foundation, so that when it does come, you're already ready. You're not blindsided. Or you might find that someone else, your competitor, is ready, and they might go to your competitor. So, it's not going to stop. It's not going to stop. It's coming your way. So
start now, start small if you must, right? But just get on that journey. Thanks for being with us, Ahila Ganesan from FutureLinQ.
Thanks for having me.
And get some strategies in place. If you need help, call her. And of course, you've been watching The Shift. I'm Frida Liu.